Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to yet another Zara Hatke conversation with someone I have huge admiration for. He's a former Army Chief, the 28th Army Chief, General Naravane. General Sahab, Namaste.
Namaskar and Jai Hind, and glad to be here and having this conversation with you.
This is a very unique conversation because not everyone expects a military thriller from a general. And that's what the Cantonment Conspiracy is. That's the book. And I'll tell you, and Karan Thapar is right when he says that the pages turn themselves because I have not been able to get off it. What brought this about? Let's start from there.
Well, firstly, it's very encouraging to get such positive feedback. When I thought of writing work of fiction, I wasn't sure whether I will actually be able to pull it off, but to go by what you are saying and what Karan Thapar has said, perhaps I've taken some baby steps in that direction. But I had gone, when I go and give my talks and lectures in various places, at one of the venues where I had gone in the evening, I was staying in a colonial type of a house, not quite unlike where we are sitting right now. And when I was having an after dinner walk with little moonlight and all, I thought this is the ideal situation or location for a murder mystery. So the location came first. That let's write a murder mystery set on that particular house. So it started, you can say, in a reverse direction. And then I started making the plot of what should it be all about.
But as you create the characters, the RRR as you call them, Rohit, Renuka and Rehmat, how much of their personalities reflect who General Naravane is? Are there bits and bobs of your own life experiences in this story?
No, each character is a person by himself or herself, and I have tried to put into them the qualities which are expected out of army personnel as far as Rohit and Renuka are concerned, and of course the general qualities that we expect of honesty, being forthright, which is expected of all of us, irrespective of what is our profession or social standing. That is also one part which I am trying to bring out, that it doesn't matter what your background is as long as your heart is in the right place.
So you have also said this in the future and not in the past. So you've deliberately set it in 2026, sometime July 2026 onwards, if my memory serves me right from the book. But you also said you've picked the characters as one is a third generation army officer and one is a civilian turned army officer. Is there a reason why you chose?
Yeah, this was to bring about, firstly, that the army and armed forces are quite egalitarian. We are not fixated that we can only have people in the army from army backgrounds. Whoever wants to join the army, when I say army, I mean armed forces, but whoever wants to join is always welcome, provided he meets the criteria and passes all the tests required. So that was why I made it such a wide range, which will also be actually motivation for people who read the book, that they can also aspire to join the armed forces.
But you also, without saying, said a lot of things, so I'll come to it one by one. One is women in combat, because you say she's one of the first batches where women are officially in the infantry, so directly into arms, so in combat. Are you a votary of it?
Well, for that, I have to go back a number of years. When I have two daughters, and when my daughters were young, and when they were deciding, what they would like to be and aspire for, so they said, we don't mind joining the army, but we will join only if we can go to Sikh Light Infantry. which is my regiment.
Yeah, 7th Battalion Sikh Light Infantry.
So obviously, women in the army, they had already started. Short Service Commission was already there.
Yeah.
But women in the combat arms was undreamt of then, and it is not even there now. So that thought was there in my mind, So in a way, by making Renuka join the infantry, I am also putting my daughter's dreams into, into action, so to say.
But when you write that, you also say that there will be the psychological resistance, the force of habit, and what women will have to go through as they embrace, or the system embraces, women cadre or women officers. Is that a reality? Is that true?
Well, the army has always been a very male-dominated force. And as in, when women have started joining initially as short service commission officers, now they've been granted permanent commission. They are now commanding their regiments
Yes.
at various. Very soon they will also get into the higher ranks, the directive ranks, brigadier and above. So these changes will happen slowly and steadily. We have always had women in the medical corps.
Yeah.
And they have risen to very high ranks, 3-star ranks, which is the highest rank in the army. So it's not that we are not used to having women in the armed forces, but in active units who also serve in field areas, that is something new. And as with anything new, there are challenges which and those challenges we'll have to learn on the job how to tackle them.
Tackle them, because you mentioned this. You mentioned Renuka's point of view, where she says that I want you to look at us, look at not that because I'm a woman officer, you have to make something available for me, or you have to provide for me. You have to treat me as an equal in your head. And that entire drill thing is a very interesting one. You have just 10 minutes to change uniform. So most, because it was all men, boys, so they would all change out in the open, wear their fresh uniform and go back into the drill. Now how do you do it for women? Now little things which have to be thought of. But is that process happening in the army and the armed forces largely?
Well, yes, definitely. We are, as I said, learning as we go along. But a little bit of change in the mental mindset is also required as we go ahead. Now we have women on board ships, on board warships, and ships are very tightly constructed places where space is always at a premium, but they are managing there. So obviously the system also has to look after having women in the armed forces, and the women themselves have to step up and not look for favors. And the women officers I have had the privilege to serve with have always put the service above their considerations, and that is also one of the reasons I've given Renuka all those qualities, and it is my way of indirectly, paying back the women officers who have served me and the army so well.
But you also show two sides of the coin, no? Somebody says, "Arey, ye to Fauji parivar se hai, so he's privileged." But from the Fauji parivar's perspective and that Rohit's perspective, he has to A, live up to his father and grandfather's reputation. B, he will always feel, the attitude will be, "Arey, you are getting privilege, so we will not give you privilege." So he has to also prove himself. On the other hand, there is the civilian thing. Tum to civilian ho, tumko kaise pata Fauji base kya hai? So that's what Renuka deals with. Is this a reality when it happens? How do officers deal? And you've also seen how different officers show different approaches to it.
Yeah, so these are all different facets of life, I would say. Nothing is ever so cut and dried. Some people are always jealous of your background, and as I've said, they think you've got it easy, you got it made. Even if you go for a foreign posting, they say ye baap ke wajah se gaya hai. So they never think it was your effort.
Rohit bhi bolta hai na, मैं तो I aced my firing, I aced my this. वो तो मेरे father ने नहीं
किया. So but where there is any place where subjectivity is involved, because firing the bullet hit is a bullet hit.
Correct.
But where a little bit of subjectivity is involved, there definitely people think that family connections and all have worked in your favor.
हाँ वो उल्टा भी तो पड़ता है ना कि अगर आपके फादर ने एज अ जूनियर ऑफिसर मेरे बैंड बजाई थी तो अब मैं तुम्हारी बैंड बजाऊंगा.
Yes, so sometimes it happens that way too. But we are expected to rise above those, personal affronts that you might have suffered, and look at an officer as an officer and what he is doing and how he is performing. And by he, I mean the officer, whether male or female. So as I've always been saying that you're an officer first and you're a man or a woman later. So do your job as an officer, rest will follow.
Yeah, it was nice to see that private looking up and saying wow, and then you say, but then duty kicks in, and then he accorded all the respect due to an officer in uniform.
So it does take you by surprise sometimes. You know, you're not expecting it. So it is very much there. But as I said, I've seen women officers dressing down burly 6-footers and doing a pretty good job of it.
Good job of it. But before we move on to the next aspect of the book and some of the plots that you have designed there, I just want to ask you, as someone who's led Bharat and Bharat's armed forces through some of the toughest times, 2019 to 2022 was the toughest, if you were to see in a century for us from multiple levels. I'll come to that in a bit. Do you believe that we are ready? Because there are a lot of women who are asking for combat roles. Do you believe that our system is ready and we should consider? Because एक ये भी है कि हमारा तो ठीक है, लेकिन अगर वॉर टाइम में, कॉन्फ्लिक्ट टाइम में, दुश्मन के हाथ, a woman officer, woman personnel is caught और लग गए, then how would we answer back to society, back to people? Is there a thought process there which says, or is this a thought process that says women can't get as physical as men, and we can't have the same parallel standards, and that's what जंग में दीवार अपना height मेल मैन वुमन देख करके नहीं चेंज करेगी. That's also another argument. So your thoughts?
So as I said, there are always many facets to every argument. The physical aspect is of course a major one. And that is because of your bodily structure. It is not that the women would not like to compete or do as well or lift as much weight or run as fast. After all, even in professional sports, you have different categories for men and women.
Correct.
It's not that they compete together. Because it's just not physically possible, whether it is tennis or athletics. So obviously those changes will always, or those differences will always be there. But given all that, once we look at each arm and service and the role that you are expected to play in peacetime and wartime, there are a lot of fields where it is possible, where the gender doesn't really make so much difference. And as far as wartime activities are concerned, when a breakthrough happens, or when an enemy, after all, when an enemy attacks, he is also going to be successful at times.
Correct.
And it is not that PWs only happen at the front line.
Yeah.
It happens throughout the combat zone, and you could be anywhere in the combat zone.
Correct. Some bat action, some incursion here, something.
So something or the other, some paradrop or something. So you can. So as women are already there in engineers, they are already there in signals. So engineers, signals, EME. So they may not be right in the front trench or bunker, but they are very much within a 10-kilometer area of the border or the front line. And within that, anything can happen. A shell can land anywhere. So the shell is not going to distinguish when it bursts that who is who. So to that extent, we should not have a closed mind. And unless you try something out, how will you know whether it works or it doesn't work?
Was the plot conflicting for you? Did you feel how much should I give each of these characters leeway, and how vulnerable should I make them? How at what level will this be beyond a military thriller? Also, people will say, as an army chief, has he given kept the status of the army and the perception of the army up? Because there are a lot of grey areas, things which happen. So was it difficult for you to choose that?
It was a little bit of a dilemma how much depth to go into. If you go too much into the military aspect, it might not be understood by a layman, or he may lose interest. On the other hand, similarly, if you go into too much depth, somebody who is from an army background will say कि ये क्या इतना डिटेल में क्यों जा रहे हैं, ये तो हमें मालूम ही है. So getting that right balance between the military aspects and how to keep the interest alive was a bit of a challenge.
No, the junior officers flirting with some of the ladies, some of those conversations, a husband, hot-tempered officer, not very happy with his wife and her indulgences. Now, are there people who are going to read this and says, ये तो हमारे बारे में तो नहीं बोला है? Or will there be others who say, अरे ये तो सर ने उनके बारे में लिखा है?
No, these are very generic things, and it happens in life. So it's not that it only happens in any field you are, any profession. Workplace romances are the norm.
Yeah.
So it's not that it doesn't happen in the IT industry or wherever. So I think when people read that, they will see it not just against the army backdrop, but they will see against their own life experiences wherever they are.
But you know that there will be a few who will know कि sir किसके बारे में लिख रहे हैं.
No, I have not really put any particular, written that with any particular person
In
or
mind.
character in mind.
Character in mind.
In fact, I was quite conscious about that. Even while choosing the names of the characters, I was quite conscious that it should not. Of course, that combination of names can be. We have now 1 billion population.
Correct. कोई भी कहीं पे भी हो सकता है.
कोई भी हो
It's
सकता
about
है.
the actions of the character. I'm not even saying the name of the character, but actions of the character कि ये हुआ कुछ ये. So obviously you would have picked up some inspiration through your long, colorful and
So these are, I think,
decorated career.
normal things which happen as part of life.
The other part is the army. There are many who believe that the army is not open to reform. It's resistant to reform. But the way you have incorporated the Agniveers into the story narrative points otherwise. So, your thoughts there. And you are bracketed as someone who had certain reservations about Agniveer as it was being formulated, and you were in service at that time. So, your thoughts.
So firstly, the armed forces are not averse to reform, but the older an organization and the more hierarchical it is, the more difficult it is to implement that reform. And I say this not only from the perspective of Agniveers, but even when I wanted to make some changes, very inconsequential and minor changes, I have hit a wall within my own organization. So it is not that. For example, one of the things which I was very against is giving bouquets at the airport and things like that. So I put a total stop to it.
हाँ पर चाय समोसा मत रोकना आप.
नहीं. So, but even that, it took a long time for people to realize that you actually mean it, and that you're not just saying it for the sake of showing that you are a no frills man or something like that. But in spite of that, people used to turn up at the airport with bouquets.
Bouquets, हाँ.
Now
You're
what-
saying it, but you expect it.
But you expect, हाँ, तो कहने की बात कुछ और so that kind of, so reform is something which you have to not only believe in yourself, but the organization also should think that yes, this is a step in the right direction. And when both these interests meet, then the reform is more likely to be accepted.
But from the inside and from the outside, it's unfortunate that Agniveer Mukhtiyar lost his life, but that was an important cog in the whole plot. But do you believe this is a transformational thing? Is it going to help, hurt? Or do you still have your reservations? Because you spend time outside also, looking at it from the outside also.
So my point always has been, and I made it earlier also, that unless you try something out, how will you know whether it works or not?
Correct.
And change is what we say is always, change is inevitable.
Correct.
And changes or reforms to an HR policy is part of your evolution. After all, not very many people know that till the mid 70s there was no pensionable service.
Correct.
It's only in 76 that the terms and conditions were changed and this pensionable part was brought in. So if a change of that type could be then done, then why not a change now to a different model?
Different model, yeah.
Now, how successful that model is going to be, only time will tell. And if there are drawbacks or some tweaks required, those tweaks can be done.
Iterations can
Iteration can be done. But to say that we will not change, in perpetuity we will not change, in next 200 years we will keep doing what we have been doing, that is, I think, not the correct approach. And I was just watching an interview, I think, of Bill Gates or someone, and he says that in that interview that whenever I've seen organizations floundering and when I've spoken to the people, they've always said that we have always done it this way.
Yeah.
And that is why they have stagnated.
Correct.
Or have succumbed. Because of that mindset that पहले से चला आ रहा है, ऐसे ही होता है,
यही रिवाज है,
यही रिवाज है. So those changes have to happen.
इसमें एक आर्गुमेंट है सर, नाम नमक निशान की बात करते हैं ना, ये निशान को लेकर के दे से दैट रेजिमेंटल लॉयल्टी that will get eroded. There are many who believe this. Do you think that's going to happen with the Agniveers? कि regimental loyalty नहीं रहेगी?
Well, we've had short service commissioned officers. They also leave after 5 years. But 20 years later, they still come for our reunions. They have not lost touch with their battalions or regiments. Neither has the regiment lost touch with them. So it is how much effort you put into a relationship.
Correct.
And relationships are two-way. So I'm sure that if everyone puts an effort into it, that aspect of Naam Namak Nishan should not really go away or will get diluted. It's what you do.
Because one of the arguments was this 75, 25, 25% fair. How much to retain, how much to hire. And if you look at the absolute numbers, we have only about 27 to 30% of our defense budget actually available for capex, because we've got operational expenses, pension expenses, etc. So somewhere somebody is trying to find a midway and say, how do I increase my bandwidth to be able to buy more for the military equipment? Is there a solution in sight for you? Or do you believe that in the future, as you've written it, things will sort themselves out?
I think things will sort themselves out. In fact, recently only the army chief made certain statements, I think, in the Raisina dialogue that some changes are under review. So as I said, policies are not written in stone, and you can never get everything 100% right at the beginning. So if tweaks are required, those will happen. But tweaks based on empirical evidence and not based on emotion. So that is how we have to look at it.
How much of, coming back to the cantonment, how much of it is it tempting to make, add some reality into the thriller, add some real aspects there as you're building the plot, and it's coming up to that it's far greater. So there is a murder a few years ago that's mentioned in a prologue, a death, then another incident that happens of an assault, and then finally another murder made to look like a suicide, and they're all somewhere connected. Were you tempted to add some real bits also in it?
So the mystery plot is totally fictional, but within that, the ambush that happens, that is, ambushes have happened in the past, and something similar to this has happened 20 years ago also, and as recently as 3 years ago.
3 years
also.
ago.
So in that sense, that is based on real events that have happened.
The military mental makeup, is there focus on keeping yourself mentally sharp, or are there mental issues which you in your tenure have also dealt with? Because in the plot it comes out that some of the aspects of mental well-being are also somewhere quietly mentioned, or mental makeup of.
Yes, see, I think one of the most important qualities that a person needs to have, again I say that irrespective of what field you're in, is of course to have a positive attitude. Without a positive attitude, everything else is not really so worth it or important. But it's very difficult to be positive at all times.
All times, correct.
We all have our ups and downs. You also have your lows where you feel the whole world is against you. And how you pull yourself out of that trough, or how others help you to come out.
Stay strong.
Is also part of the part of life and how you. But within the armed forces, I think we bank much more on our comrades to be able to identify that we are not our usual selves, and to give us that backing, and that is what Esprit de Corps is all about.
Spirit of the Corps. But because you've gone through, and I know I'm going a little beyond the book in this one, between 2019 to 2022, Bharat saw COVID, Bharat saw Galwan, and Bharat saw perhaps the biggest troop movement and pushback with the enemy on the eastern border, with the Chinese. So when you look back at that, are we better prepared for a similar scenario in the future? Second, at that time, how did you manage the mobilization and mental makeup? Was there a shift in the thought process of our own military? And will you say that the ghosts of 1962 are now buried?
See, COVID came as a surprise to the whole world, not just to India. But I think within the armed forces, because we stay in cantonments, we were able to manage our own setup and our health much better. But having said that, I will also say that we tested all our personnel numerous times, because we could not afford that even one infected person should reach the front line. Or the pickets at inaccessible places, where because of him the whole post could get affected. So we did multiple rounds of testing before anybody was really allowed to get forward deployed. And I think because of that we were able to maintain a very high standard of
But that must have been a tough thing, no, when you're making such an operational movement towards Ladakh, moving so many regiments, so many troop movements happening.
So that's why, because we took certain proactive measures, we were able to, in spite of it being at the height of the first wave, we were able to deploy so many people. And perhaps that is what the adversary may not have counted on. Anticipated that in spite of COVID and all those restrictions in place, we could induct so many troops into Ladakh. And for that I must again, and I've said it number of occasions, and I once again must express my gratitude to the Indian Air Force and their strategic lift capability, which allowed us to carry out such rapid movements, which once again I think was not anticipated, that we will be able to move so many troops into.
Was that one of the first examples to say a unified command kind of a format can work for us? Because there are again 2-3 thoughts there.
No, we've always been having unified structure. In 71 war also we had it. So it's not that we don't coordinate with each other, but having a unified command will make things even easier. So if we gave in a demand for aircraft, they were always available the next morning. It was not that it was a long convoluted process and we said we want it tomorrow and it came 1 week later. It was not that. So everyone rises to the occasion. So there was no cause for complaint as such. But it can be even easier if all the elements, all the combat elements, all the support elements are under one commander. The timings and the coordination will be that much simpler. It's a way of becoming more and more efficient.
So many believe कि हमारा सबसे ज़्यादा vulnerability as a country is our waters, and we don't focus much on our naval strength. And unless there is a unified command structure where the Navy, Air Force, and the armed forces, like with the US and some of the other nations, happens, we will not be able to orient ourselves for the next war, which would be either on data or in the waters. That's what many are saying. Your thoughts? Final 2 questions. So yeah.
No, the naval aspects are not totally ignored. We are very much conscious of India's very important geostrategic location astride the sea lanes of communication through the Indian Ocean, and what all we need to do to overcome those vulnerabilities. And in fact, the Navy has grown many-fold in the last decade or so. In fact, about 7-8 years ago, the entire Indian Navy strength was equal to the Indian Army officer strength. That was the
gap.
That was the sort of relative strengths. But now the Navy is almost double what they were earlier. So definitely the Navy is getting the importance that it requires. But again, it is a capital intensive change. Every warship, every submarine, an aircraft carrier is not just the carrier itself, but the aircraft that go onto it.
Yeah.
So that kind of capital investment is obviously, I won't say lacking, but it will happen at its own speed.
Yeah.
Given
you need to have the money to be able to spend
we have to have money. We are a developing country after all.
Yeah.
So it's not that we can spend. It's not a bottomless well that the finance minister can just take money out of. So these management issues, firstly between development and defense.
Defense, ji.
That is the first challenge.
Correct.
And second is within defense, Army, Navy, Air Force.
Air Force.
That is the second challenge. So both these challenges have to be met, keeping an eye on the future and develop those capabilities which are going to be required or which will be where the battle will be fought 10-15 years down the line, and not what is the battle today.
Yeah.
And that is where the
but वो thought है sir
challenge lies, and where the leadership has to have that strategic outlook. It's very easy to order 10 more tanks today, but are those tanks going to be the battle winning factor 15 years from now? That is the crystal gazing that has to be done.
Is it happening? Is there an orientation towards that crystal gazing कि अभी नहीं?
Oh yes, definitely there is.
but और थोड़ा ज़्यादा करना.
We are always looking ahead, learning from the wars which are going on, especially the Russia-Ukraine war, what is happening in Gaza, how difficult it is fighting in built-up areas, FIBUA as we call it.
Correct.
So we are learning all the time from whatever is happening all over the world. And not only these operational aspects, we are also looking at the technological changes,
right.
AI, quantum computing, the Internet of Things, hypersonics. So all these are also very much on our horizon. Cyber warfare.
Correct.
So it's not that we are just looking at physical assets, but we are also looking into these intangibles, and where all these get fused in a future battlefield environment.
Do we have a solid national security doctrine in place?
We don't have a formal national security doctrine, but the various I won't say pronouncement, but various doctrines taken out by the Army, Navy, Air Force, or nuclear doctrine which is in
Yeah.
place. So if you club all these together, then loosely it becomes like a
But we don't have a formal one.
not a formal one, which
You think we should have one?
and a national security doctrine is not just military or defense related, because when you say national security, then security has a lot of aspects
Dynamics,
into it.
yeah.
It is not just
Yeah.
military security.
Correct.
It includes energy security, food security, health, as COVID showed that health is also a very important aspect. If your population is not healthy, where will the recruits come for the
Yeah.
armed forces?
Correct.
So therefore, if you have a all-encompassing national security strategy, which also lays down what each and every ministry has to do, telecom. So what each and every ministry has to do and where they fit in, then that coordination will become that much easier. Otherwise, you're dealing with on one-to-one basis, defense ministry with telecom, telecom with health
Health.
with somebody else.
Correct.
So rather than that, so if the national security strategy says you have to be self-contained, I'm just giving an example
good.
top of my head, that you have to be self-contained for 6 months. Then you have to have 6 months reserve of oil.
Oil.
You have to have 6 months reserve of food. So obviously the agriculture ministry has to think that where is 6 months food and where am I going to store it?
Cold story. Correct.
You need storage also.
Correct.
In that sense, all-encompassing strategy makes sense.
Makes sense. Finally, let me ask you, should we name who the villain is?
Oh, no. That would be giving the game away.
And do you think there will be more people who will be interested in the armed forces and joining the armed forces after this book?
I think that was one of the sort of
मुझे पता है कौन है विलेन नहीं बताऊंगा सर मना कर रहे हैं
underlying sort of aim that it should be a motivating factor, that when I've tried to show various facets of army life, whether in training, whether operations, the social aspects also. It's not that we are all the time only deployed on the borders and having a tough life. We also have our own
You have your peacetime responsibilities also.
peacetime. So it's all encompassing. I think it should motivate more people to join the armed forces.
इसका sequel आ रहा है सर?
Good question. Everybody asks me that. Maybe I can start thinking about it.
Because of the response so far.
It depends on the response.
For a military thriller, this is unputdownable. So you have author M.M. Naravane also as a fiction writer.
On the horizon.
Yeah. And when is the autobiography coming?
Well, let's see. I'm always hopeful. Hope is eternal, as they say.
True. Let's see if the 4 stars of destiny we can get our hands on before the Cantonment Conspiracy Part 2 comes out. General Naravane, lovely speaking with you, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.